Why should turning 18 automatically qualify someone to vote, while a 16-year-old who understands politics better is excluded? Age does not equal political understanding, yet it is what decides who gets to stay in our democracy. Before I continue, I would like to start off with some setup. To abolish the minimum age requirement to vote, it means to remove the fixed age-based eligibility as a condition for voting rights. For example, 18 plus in almost every country. And to replace it with a basic political test, it means to introduce a short assessment that determines whether or not you can vote based on your understanding of a basic political system. The policy for this debate is that every citizen who wants to vote must take a basic political test. If they pass, they are guaranteed and granted voting rights in those elections and are not required to take it again in the next election. In our test, the questions are not about ideology or which party is right, which party is better, but it's about the basic understanding of how the system works. The stakeholders in this debate are those under 18 citizens who want to vote. It's about the government, it's also about the society, because it's affected by the overall quality of all democratic decisions. We decided to choose them because we know that they are able to provide the society with a new perspective and a fresher viewpoint that can lead the country into a new path. Now, today I will be talking about why abolishing the minimum age requirement for voting is good. Firstly, it ensures fairer access to political rights. Removing the age barrier ensures that capable young citizens are not unfairly excluded just because of birth date. And secondly, it opens opportunities for passionate young citizens. Under the current system of status quo, many of them are forced to wait until 18 regardless of how informed or active they are. By allowing under 18s to vote, if they pass the political test, we reward those who have a genuine interest and engagement in politics. And at worst, we risk some imperfect filtering, but think about the political system and the policy we are planning to implement. What are the chances of super imperfect filtering happening? Also, under the system as of right now, we guarantee a systematic exclusion of competent young citizens, and that is such a bigger and more unjust failure. And next, it encourages people to do research and to be educated about politics. As the policy states that everyone is required to take the test regardless of being above the age of 18, younger citizens will be encouraged and eager to research and understand politics because it means that no matter what age they are, if they don't understand politics, if they can't pass the test, then they can't vote at all. So according to our eager human nature, we have a mindset of better sooner than later. Our policy will make sure that young people have more incentives to do research because they realize that even if they are over 18, they still have to take the test. This means that they will gain more information about basic knowledge, and if they do research, they will likely find themselves digging even deeper and caring about their country to be able to do research and therefore make the country better. And though the other side might mention young people easily being influenced, people get influenced regardless of age. But also, by forcing young people to understand how politics works before voting, we actually reduce blind copying of your parental views or of your classmates' influence. They must engage with the system themselves rather than simply hearing opinions from other people. At this core, the debate is not about lowering or raising the age requirement, but it's about whether we should base political rights on numbers or actual understanding. Age does not always reflect political compete. Yet, as of status quo, it continues to decide who gets a vote in democracy. And on our side of the house, we are not changing democracy to make it easier, but instead, we are changing it to make it more rational, more engaged, and more fair. Never been proud to propose. Thank you.
The right to vote should not be limited to how smart you are. Everyone deserves a voice, whatever your situation. And why? Because every single person should have the right to vote, to have the right to have a voice in who represents you and who ultimately affects you. Okay, onto some setup. So our counter model is just we stay with the status quo, where your eligibility to vote is objective of your age, which is usually 18, and That's usually beyond the reach of state manipulation because like every citizen, regardless of wealth, education, etc., will reach 18 and can still vote. Okay, some framing. So, what are the key principles that democracy was originally built on? So, firstly, the Greeks believed in rule by the people, right? So that means the supreme power rested on the citizens to make political decisions. And number two, all citizens did possess the same legal rights, regardless of their social status. And the impact of this will be shown later in my substantive. And who will create this test? The neg believes it's probably the government, which is already the best case scenario, as other test creators can skew the test so that it benefits who they support. And my second speaker will talk about this later. On to some rebuttal of the AF. The AF rewards the people who want to participate in politics, as they said. However, these people are likely people who do have the time to engage in politics, which means that marginalized people who might still want to participate are excluded, as I'll talk about later. Okay, what are the two arguments that we will be presenting today? One, regressive disenfranchisement. Number two, it gives the government power to decide who participates in democracy. Onto my substantive. Okay, so this paves the way for regressive disenfranchisement, which ultimately leads to inequality. Some context. So regressive disenfranchisement is when there's like a rollback or restriction of voting rights. So this occurs when laws, policies, or system practices are implemented to make voting more difficult, or when previously granted suffrage is revoked. So these measures disproportionately marginalize these minority, lower income, or disabled populations. Okay, this is true because one, marginalized communities, for example, with less education, they're a second language speaker, have a higher chance of failing this test. This is because when you do have less education or you do speak a second, it is your second language. They can still know who they want to vote for because it is in the interest of them to know which candidate is going to benefit themselves the most. However, these marginalized communities are not likely to gonna know how the government works because they don't really need to know that in order to know who is their benefit preferred candidate. And as a result, marginalized communities will not be able to vote as they might not be able to pass. And two, slower learners with like disabilities are also disadvantaged here. So a person with dyslexia, for example, may struggle enormously with a formal written exam, most likely because the test format is a barrier to them. Okay, what are the impacts of this argument? So firstly, this creates underrepresentation. So the people most affected by the government decisions, such as low-income families, people with disabilities, etc., lose their ability to influence the policies that affect their lives. And this means that governments become less accountable to these groups because they no longer need their votes to stay in power. And secondly, as a result of this, this creates a cycle of inequality because once these groups are excluded from voting, politicians have fewer incentives to invest in these disability support services, public education, etc., because they cannot vote against them at the ballot box. Thank you.
Why are we taking freedom from the people who are also a part of our community? I'm gonna go into my rebuttals and then into my argument. So my first rebuttal, the other side said that the right to vote shouldn't be limited to how smart you are because everyone should have the right to vote. We never said that. Firstly, we never said that only smart people should be able to vote. It is only some basic information about how the government goes or how the political democracy runs in your country. But we think that people will become smarter and more educated and help promote their country because they will dig deeper and make decisions by themselves based on more information they research. And secondly, everyone can become smarter. This is because they can literally go online and learn more from different websites. Because everyone can go everyone nowadays have phones. So this also takes out their point about how they said poor people cannot access information, because this is so illogical. They can go on like their mobile phones and just like search up things they want to know. They also said that why are we assuming that people will do research? Firstly, people will need to do research because they want to pass the test. They don't have another way to pass the
Why?
test. And secondly, even if it's true that not everyone will dig deeper and do more research, at least more people will do research, which is better than doing nothing on their side of the house. Now, going into my argument, a word without a basic political test is much worse. Firstly, we know that people mature at different age. During teenage years, the brain develops at different rates for different people. People who are under 18 will not be allowed to vote. This is clearly unfair because some people have a brain that are fully educated and already understand these things, as my first speaker already stated. They provide a better point of view and are also citizens of the country, so they should be allowed to vote and deserve the right. And secondly, right now in the status quo, young people do not have enough knowledge because they do not research. This will make young people this is because young people are not interested in learning in politics. But with our policy, young people will have more incentives to be educated because they have the freedom to vote and they want to pass the test. This is very important because we need smart young people to lead the country in the future, because they're the future generation who will live in the country. And thirdly, in the status quo, people are easily influenced by social media or parents. But with the test, people will get influenced by biasness because you need to actually do research in order to pass the test. With the test, this means they actually need to do more research to be confident in doing the test. You can't just pass by hearing or listening to your mom, and you don't know if that's even a credible source. So this also reduces double or triple votes because you will not vote for the same person or the same party. So this also makes the overall voting system more fair. And fourth and lastly, and even for adults, they're often having fixed mindsets in like a specific political party. So they will also have to be educated and do more research in order to pass the test. This means that they will hear more from others' perspectives, and this could actually change their mind or be more open-minded to hear from other parties. So the impacts of this is young people will get smarter and more educated, and they will understand the world of politics, which can be used in different places, not just in voting. They will develop critical thinking skills and encourage listening to different perspectives. And as I already stated, young people are extremely important because they are the future of the country, and we need smart people to build the country in the future. Without them, the country could collapse and have less intelligent people. So panel, if you want a world where people are actually educated and have the best outcome for the country, vote for proposition.
Two things to debate. First rebuttal and second argument. First, the opposition states that this political literacy test will open up opportunities for younger citizens who will be eager to research and incentivized to research, and therefore will be able to take the test. However, we respond to this by asking, if your standard is just eagerness to learn, why replace an objective age threshold with a subjective test instead of keeping a rule that applies equally to everyone? Even if younger citizens are eager to learn, that only shows they could succeed under a literacy test, not that the age requirement should be replaced. If young people are eager to research, then under the status quo, they are already incentivized to become informed before and after getting their vote at 18. Nothing about eagerness requires removing the age threshold. Now to my argument. Political literacy tests give the government the power to decide who deserves democracy. First, in context. Democracy is built on the principle of political equality. Every citizen has an equal right to influence the government because government decisions affect everyone. The status quo reflects this by using a simple, universal rule. Once citizens reach adulthood, they all receive the same voting rights. The affirmative abandons this principle by allowing the government to decide who is sufficiently qualified to participate. Three mechanisms. 1. Political knowledge is inherently subjective. Unlike a drawing test, there is no universally accepted standard for what someone must know before voting. Should political literacy mean understanding parliamentary procedure, economics, climate policy, or current affairs? These are all basic knowledge of government. Every choice reflects a judgment about which knowledge matters most, and AFIS fail to frame this. Because governments or electoral bodies decide the content of the test, they also decide which forms of knowledge are rewarded. Different tests advantage different groups, meaning the state indirectly shapes who gains this political influence. The AF therefore concentrates power in the hands of whoever defines political literacy, whereas our case treats every citizen's political judgment as equally legitimate. 2. Second mechanism, governments gain incentive to shape the electorate. Once passing a literacy test determines who can vote, governments therefore benefit from influencing who passes because those people decide the future elections. This does not require obvious manipulation. Raising the pass mark, changing question topics, or using more technical language in the test can all affect which groups qualify while appearing politically neutral. Even if the first government acts fairly, every future government inherits this incentive. Our case removes that conflict entirely because governments should not have the capacity to change the electorate by changing the exam. Third mechanism, political rights become confidential. Universal suffrage rests on the principle that citizenship alone entitles someone to political participation. The affirmative replaces that principle with one where citizens must first satisfy government-defined conditions. Once society accepts that voting rights can depend on passing a test, introducing additional conditions become far easier because the principle of unconditional political equality has already been abandoned. NEG preserves voting as a guaranteed right, while AF makes it a contingent on continued government approval. What's the impact of this argument? The impact of this argument is significant. The affirmative gives governments enduring influence over who participates in democracy. This is both unfair and unequal in society, so we believe inequality is worse on our side. Even well-designed tests create incentives for future manipulation and gradually weaken universal political equality. A democracy is more legitimate when every citizen has an equal voice than when governments decide who has earned one. For these reasons, proud to oppose. Thank you.
Panel. Opposition keeps talking about dyslexia or people with disabilities, and with all respect to them, I have to say that this is only a small minority of the citizens of a whole country that would probably not have any impact to do with this debate in the first place. What are we talking about in this debate? This debate, we're talking about the majority of the citizens who are young people, aka the future generations. Millions of them are way more impactful. Their voices matter more important, and this means that their whole case is revolving around a small minority of cases that would probably not even have an impact in a country to begin with. An impact that is so minor that it should not even be accounted for this debate. Now, this is how my speech is going to go. I'll be doing my rebuttals, and then I'll be doing a comparison of weighing of best case and worst case scenario to show you why even if we took the best case from their world and compared to our world for our worst case, we still win in this debate. So my responses. So the first speaker of opposition said that the right to vote shouldn't be limited to how smart you are. But our response is that we never said that only smart people should be able to vote, which has already been responded by my second speaker, which means that his entire argument has already crumbled. It is only some basic information, basic questions that we're asking, such as who is the head of your country's government. Even some of the disabled people could easily answer these questions if they just do basic knowledge research in their own on the internet. It is not that hard. So the basic questions are just like, how does someone become the head of government? It's just how the government runs in general in a country. This is so easy that even some disabled people are able to answer. Furthermore, we think that people will become smarter and more educated, while they're making people not become smarter or more educated, and they have not yet shown us the impacts of why that would be good, or how keeping the status quo will be good and help promote their country. They also said that slower learners will struggle and be unable to vote. But this means that they will likely not have done any research to begin with to even vote for a good president. This means that their decisions will only be based on the people around them, which has already been stated by my first speaker. Now I'll be doing my rebuttals against the second speaker of opposition. She said that political knowledge is subjective. We agree that this political knowledge should be subjective, and it is subjective, but that is why our policy is only a test of basic knowledge. But what this means is that our side, we're encouraging people to use their own thinking to be able to come to a subjective conclusion by themselves from all the information online that they have, to come to a subjective information conclusion and be able to not just be blinded by their parents or by their friends who are saying who to vote. This means that they are actually thinking for themselves about who they want to vote, which is way more subjective than listening to other people speaking. Now moving on to a comparison of the best case and worst case scenario. So their best case scenario in this world is that they help dyslexia people or a small amount of people with disabilities to be guaranteed to be able to vote 100% of the time, while we help way more people across the whole entire country to be able to vote. And even with these people with disabilities, the ones who are actually gonna do research by themselves, they could actually be able to vote. So this is going to encourage them to be able to be actually want to have an incentive to actually vote. Our worst case scenario is that some people aren't able to vote, but this will help make democracy more fair, as already been stated in my framing of the first speaker, that more people, especially young people, are more likely to do research and dig even deeper, which means that they're able to come to a better and more subjective opinion and a conclusion to actually vote for the more correct and good president. So proud to propose.
The affirmative argues that age is not a good measure of political understanding because some young people may know more than some adults. However, this misunderstands the purpose of the voting age. It is not meant to identify the most knowledgeable voters. Instead, it exists as a clear, objective, and equal standard that assumes a basic level of maturity, independence, and responsibility. Voting is not just about knowing facts about parliament or government systems. It requires judgment, the ability to weigh competing priorities, and an understanding of long-term consequences that could affect an entire country, not just yourself. A political literacy test can only measure factual knowledge, not maturity, life experience, or real decision-making ability. However, even if there are exceptions, policy cannot be built around them. An age-based system applies equally to everyone, while a literacy test turns voting into something that must be earned, and it risks exclusion based on education, language ability, or background. Further, the affirmative claims that a political literacy test will create a more informed electorate and improve democracy. However, this assumes that passing a test produces better voters, which is not necessarily true. A test only measures whether someone can remember basic facts about how government works, not whether they understand real political issues or policy impacts. In reality, most political understanding develops over time through education, lived experience, discussion, and engagement with current events, none of which can be captured in a short exam. People may also forget what they studied after passing the test, meaning it does not guarantee lasting improvement in political awareness. Further, voting is not meant to reward academic knowledge. It is a democratic right that allows citizens to choose representatives based on their values and lived experience and what they believe. Even someone who struggles with political facts can still make reasonable decisions. Because of this, the test does not meaningfully improve voter quality, but it instead creates the appearance of a more informed electorate while adding barriers to participation. Furthermore, the affirmative argues that the current voting age unfairly excludes capable young people. While we accept that some teenagers are highly informed, public policy cannot be built around exceptional cases. Laws require clear and consistent standards that apply equally to everyone. Age-based rules are used in many areas because they are simple, objective, and practical. The affirmative also suggests that some teenagers are already capable of making political decisions. However, even if this is true, it does not justify removing the age threshold. Cognitive development research shows that the key aspects of decision-making, including impulse control, long-term reasoning, and weighing consequences, continue developing into early adulthood, even as late as 25 years old. This is why most societies place voting eligibility at adulthood rather than adolescence, even though individual maturity varies. Under the propositions model, exclusion does not disappear, it simply changes form. Instead of excluding people based on age, it excludes people based on performance in a government-designed test. This risks unfairly excluding individuals who are politically engaged but disadvantaged by weaker schooling, literacy barriers, language difficulties, or financial barriers. Importantly, this disproportionately harms marginalized communities, including people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, people with learning disabilities, and those with limited access to education or language support. The affirmative assumes that everyone can simply study and pass, but in reality, access to educational resources is unequal. This creates a cycle where already disadvantaged groups are more likely to fail the test, and therefore are further excluded from political participation, reinforcing existing inequality rather than reducing it. This is not inclusive, just a less transparent form of exclusion and a continuation of a negative cycle. The affirmative tries to downplay this by calling it imperfect filtering. However, in democracy, even small levels of error matter because they directly affect political equality. If eligible citizens are incorrectly denied vote, that is a serious harm. On the other hand, if the test is too easy, it becomes meaningless and does not improve voter quality at all. This creates a contradiction. Either the test is strict enough to exclude people fairly or too weak to be useful. It cannot improve both democracy and avoid harm.
Even if we accept the affirmative's claim that young people may be influenced by their environment, this is not unique to them. All voters are influenced by family, friends, media, and culture, etc. If influence alone were enough to question voting rights, then no voter will be fully independent. More importantly, the propositions test does not actually remove influence. It only tests factual knowledge about government structures. It does not measure whether someone's beliefs are independent or critically formed. A person can pass this test while still completely repeating their parents' political views. This means the policy does not solve the problem it claims to address, which is why I could not be prouder to oppose. Thank you.
Judge, this debate is ultimately about whether we preserve a clear, equal rule for democratic participation or replace it with a subjective gatekeeping system disguised as basic knowledge. Before I begin, I'd like to note that proposition has not meaningfully responded to opposition's POIs. The affirmative keeps trying to downplay their model by saying it's only basic information that is tested. But that is not a defense because it's literally a contradiction of their case. If the information is truly basic, then it raises a decisive problem. If it's just basic information on the test, then how is that a meaningful threshold for democratic inclusion at all? Because in that world, anyone could eventually pass it. That makes it either not selective enough to justify replacing age, or it becomes selective in practice once institutions design, administer, and interpret it. So either the test is redundant or it becomes real gatekeeping. Second, their incentive claim collapses. They say that young people will become more informed and they have the incentive to research, therefore they will pass the test. But that incentive already exists under our case and the status quo. Schools, media, and civic life already reward political awareness without attaching exclusion. You do not need to deny someone a vote to motivate learning, so their model introduces a punishment mechanism without a unique educational benefit. Third, even basic literacy tests are not neutral in implementation. The state still defines the content, sets the pass mark, and interprets the answers. That inevitably creates variability, bias, and unequal impacts based on education quality and socio-economic background, as rebutted by my third speaker. So their attempt to sanitize it as a basic does not remove discretion, but actually concentrates it. Therefore, when you compare both worlds, we preserve equal, predictable access to democracy, and they replace it with a system that is either meaningless or selectively exclusionary. On both, we win. On every key metric, fairness, risk, and net benefit, the opposition is superior. That is why we win this debate. Thank you.
This debate is not about disabled people. This debate is having the youth to have the right to actually vote. So I'm the reply speaker and I will go through our points and why we win this debate. So on our side, we talked about how we would ensure fairer access to political rights, open opportunities for passionate young citizens, and encourage people to do research and be educated. While on their side, they claim that our model increases inequality for groups like low-income citizens, second language speakers, and disabled people, which is not true at all, which was already pointed out by our whole side because we already stated that the current system already has hard inequality because the age requirement literally ensures the total exclusion regardless of ability, which was already stated by the third speaker. And second language speakers have websites and electronic devices that can easily be translated to other languages. So this doesn't even make sense on their side. And and how they said our policy was bad, we think that it's actually good because it at least proves that the voters have some clear understanding of what they are voting and advocating for, not just following the information, because these like small pieces of information can easily be wrong because they are passed down from their parents who usually don't have like much knowledge about this. And we also agree with how laws should be consistent, but consistency does not justify using a rule like age if it does not reflect ability. Not all teenagers are incapable. Some are more informed than adults, and our model does not give random exceptions as was accused by side opposition. It uses a basic political test to measure readiness fairly. Finally, in their case, they defend a system where age alone decides voting rights. Even if someone is not informed, we stand against that. We believe that voting should be allowed based on your understanding. So overall, their system is simpler but unfair, while our system is more fair, more informed, and gives young, passionate people a real chance to participate. But panel, I actually don't understand the whole case. Their whole argument was about disabled people, which is a much smaller group than the young people. And at least more research is also better than none. It is better than not giving rights to these young people at all. And I've never been more proud to propose.